Welcome to the Rowan University Department of Theater and Dance. This performance includes a brief 15-minute intermission. In case of emergency, please note the fire exits at the sides and rear of the auditorium. Please silence all electronic devices and refrain from use throughout the production. Photography and video are strictly prohibited. Food and beverages are not permitted in the theater. Smoking is prohibited throughout the building. Welcome back to Live Theater and Dance. We hope you enjoy the show.
Hello, I am Natalie Malanofi, and I want to take this opportunity to thank you for attending this evening's two works of documentary theater based on the testimony of Holocaust survivors Rose Iskevich-Recknick and Rosalie Lebovich-Simon. We are especially honored to have Rosalie among us this evening. In honor of Yom HaShoah, or Holocaust Remembrance Day, please stand for a moment of silence and remembrance for the 6 million Jewish people and other marginalized people murdered by the Nazis during the Holocaust. Thank you. The Manya Project is dedicated to Manya Friedman-Perel. Manya saw most of her family for the last time during the liquidation of the Radom ghetto in Poland. Her family was composed of a mother and father, 5 brothers, and 5 sisters. At the end of the war, Manya learned that her mother, father, 2 brothers, and sister were murdered at Treblinka. During the war, she lost 2 more brothers. That is 7 out of 12 murdered by the Nazis. Even after her experience of so much trauma, Manya spent almost 50 years telling her story to groups and individuals throughout Philadelphia and the metropolitan area. She told her story many times over the years, but she didn't want to talk about it. 75 years after the liberation of Auschwitz-Birkenau, she still had nightmares. She couldn't sleep, yet she had to tell this story to combat those who would deny the Holocaust. We are living in an era with increasing anti-Semitism and violence committed against Jewish people. It is more important than ever to hear survivors' stories. We need to hear it. We need to hear it from the source, the witnesses, those that lived it. Manya left this earth on July 29th, 2020. But in 2018, she gave Dr. Anthony Hostetter the permission to tell her story through documentary theater. Manya is the inspiration for this project and the 4 plays presented yesterday and this evening. The hope is that these staged works can help keep survivor testimony alive. Survivors, thank you. Thank you for showing us a very human face from a horrible, monstrous crime. Thank you for helping us understand the truth behind events that are ultimately impossible to understand. Thank you, Manya, Rosalie, and the Recknick family for allowing us to embody these histories on stage.
sehr Leben, der nach in Schlaf kann mich schweben. Auf dem Feuer, wir singen leider, die Nacht ist teuer, wenn wir mitnehmen.
The German invasion of Poland on September 1st, 1939 forever changed Rose Iskevich-Recknick's life. Days after the invasion, Nazis killed her father, along with 28 other men from her neighborhood because they were Jews. Rose, her mother, sister, and brother survived the ghettos for 4 years before transport to Auschwitz-Birkenau. Upon arrival, she saw her brother for the last time. In January 1944, less than 5 months after arriving in Auschwitz, the Nazis selected Rose Iskevich-Recknick's mother and sister for the gas chambers. The last words her mother spoke to Rose was, "Try to survive and tell the world. Try to survive and tell the world." Rose survived, but she lost almost all of her family. Besides her immediate family, Rose lost everyone in her family that she had grown up with. 6 aunts and uncles, along with many more cousins, due to Hitler's final solution, which systematically murdered 6 million Jewish people. The facts are clear. 6 million Jews were murdered because of Nazi ideology that allowed racism and hatred to become national policy. A policy that led Hermann Goering to sign into law the final solution. A solution which institutionalized legal theft, incarceration, enslavement, and created the systematic killing machine intended to wipe the entire Jewish population off the face of Europe. Rose was 17 years old when she entered the gates of Auschwitz-Birkenau in August 1943. She was 19 years old when liberated by British troops from Bergen-Belsen on April 15, 1945. Rose, who lived through selections, typhus, dysentery, starvation, and torturous labor, credits her survival to miracles, but most importantly to luck. Her mother's charge to survive and tell the world provided Rose with a reason to stay alive, even during her deepest moments of despair. Rose would go on to rebuild her life. She married a survivor, immigrated to the United States, raised 2 daughters, and had a career. Her family would grow to include 5 grandchildren and 13 great-grandchildren. While I never had the opportunity to meet Rose, I find her inspiring. Rose always remembered her mother's command to survive and tell the world, even though that required her constantly reliving a nightmare she would have wanted to forget. And she told the world. Rose spent most of her life in America telling students and others about the Holocaust. One student who witnessed her story wrote, "Rose presents the human side of the Holocaust. Rose was saved by a miracle, and we should all think long and hard about her survival. She is a flower that has come back to life and grows to show the world her beauty." While Rose lives on in the memories of those who have encountered her and have witnessed her experience, it is my hope as an actor that I am able to present her story with the dignity and honesty she always brought to people. While I did not live the horrors of the Holocaust, I hope that this witnessing of Rose's story will help preserve her memory and bring some humanity to a history that proved to be so inhumane. These are Rose's words. It is her personal account and history of her experience of the Holocaust. Because of the announcement of the German invasion plans, my parents tried to decide what to do. Should we stay and face the enemy? Or should we run away to a distant area in the hope that the Polish army would fight back and succeed in defeating Hitler's army? The decision was to run. So we left our home with a few belongings, such as clothing, bedding, and the food we had in the apartment. We rode about 50 kilometers to Olkusz, where the Polish driver left us near a large pile of hay. This was to be our resting place for the night, and in the morning we would decide what to do next. The sky was lit with artillery. Any second we thought the bullets would reach us, but by some miracle, they did not. However, to our dismay, within a few hours we saw a motorcade of German tanks. The Polish army, ill-equipped, had given up. The enemy had caught up with us. At this point, our escape seemed futile. Why remain in a strange town surrounded by Germans when we could be in the same situation, but at least in our own home? The 50 kilometers back to Benjin seemed like an eternity. The town seemed very quiet. Very few people were in the streets. We couldn't wait to get into bed, for we were exhausted. No sooner had we rested our heads than shots burst through our windows. My father ordered us to lie flat on the floor in order to avoid being hit. We were terrified. Voices from outside carried through a megaphone announced, "All youth and rouse!" All troops out. We were ordered to march down the street and face the enemy. Without explanation, they loaded the men, 29 of them, onto a large truck and told the rest of us to go back home. I could read the relief on my father's face when he saw his family free to go. What will happen to him? Will I ever see him again? My handsome, intelligent father. He took care of everything, and I loved him so much. And I knew he loved my siblings and me more than anything, and was ready to give his life for us. Who will protect us now? My father, Abel Itzkevich, aged 36 in 1939, was a stern man, an intellectual and a loner. His family was his entire universe. He was an only child. His mother died in childbirth, leaving him alone with his father and a nanny who cared for him like a son. My father was not a religious man, but a very staunch Zionist and a proud Jew. We were proud of our heritage, and in case we forgot about it for even a moment, there were plenty of Polish anti-Semites to remind us of it quite often. Name-calling, stone-throwing, burning fur coats Jewish women were wearing with cigarettes were common occurrences. No, we never felt truly at home in Poland. My mother's maiden name was Anja Saferstein. She was one of 8 children. Her mother died shortly before I was born, so I never had a grandmother. My mother was gregarious and always laughed and joked. People loved being in her presence. I often wondered how these two opposites got together and fell in love, but they both lived in apartments around the same courtyard and their families knew each other, so fall in love they did. My sister Bronia was the firstborn of my parents' 3 children. Bronia and I sometimes quarreled, mostly because we invaded each other's wardrobes. Bronia just wanted respect from her little sister, who was not so little and had a mind of her own. Mark, my 8-year-old brother, was adorable, with a round, sweet face surrounded by dark hair. When he was born, a boy after 2 daughters, it was as if the Messiah had arrived. How happy everyone was with our little Marevchik. It was always I whom Mommy appointed to take my little brother along, even though he got in my way when I was with my friends. He was so sweet, so grateful to be tagging along with me. I loved him so much. We were a middle-class family. My father earned a respectable living and provided well for his family. My parents sacrificed other things to provide us with the best possible education. They considered education their most important responsibility. I was the best student in my classes and always had all A's on my report card. Nothing less was expected of me, and I loved learning. From the time my father and the other men were taken from us, the mood on Pilsudska 13 was one of gloom and desperation. But sometimes there were days when hope and elation prevailed. A fictitious rumor circulated that the men taken out of Pilsudska were led away someplace and were alive and well. We clung to this ray of hope, however unsubstantiated the news was. But grieving went on and never really stopped. Tragically, at the end of 1941, the people living in the building adjacent to the city hall admitted to witnessing the execution of these 29 men in the courtyard. We also learned that these 29 men and 1 woman were buried in a mass grave in the Christian cemetery. The Nazis would not even allow us the right to bury our loved ones with their families saying Kaddish, a ritual mourner's prayer. Immediately, we had to deal with our own survival. There was a food shortage, so one of us always had to stand in line waiting for bread or whatever food was being offered at the given time. Businesses and properties were seized, and all Jews were prohibited from attending schools and universities. A curfew was enforced, so we had to be home each evening at dusk, and all Jews were ordered to wear a white armband with a Jewish star on it or a yellow Star of David with Judah written in the middle. The Germans designated certain areas to be occupied by Jews. Fewer and fewer apartments were available, and the area was getting more congested. So, we left our beloved apartment on Buzynska Street. With great difficulty, we found a small, less desirable apartment a few streets away. Without any male help, we somehow managed to move our belongings, the ones we were able to hold on to, and the furniture that would fit into our new apartment. In the meantime, a Judenrat was formed, and all the orders from the Germans were presented to the Judenrat, who in turn were responsible for carrying them out. The Germans made our Jewish brothers tools in their hands and gave them the task of collecting Jewish gold, silver, and other valuables from us, a demand they made quite frequently. They usually deceived us by saying that the loot was in lieu of sending transports away to concentration camps. We gladly gave them whatever they wanted in order to avoid deportation. While many people were being deported, the people of Benjin were being pushed into increasingly cramped quarters. To make matters worse, Jews from surrounding small communities were resettled to Benjin, making housing even harder to secure and food less available. The living area was shrinking and the population was swelling. We were constantly meeting new people whom we didn't know before the war. We were all Jews, a cursed, inferior race, and we were all condemned to the same fate. The SS randomly caught people in the streets and shipped them away, sometimes never to be heard from again. Despair was felt in every family. Periodically, there were orders to assemble in a large field where selections were taking place, and thousands of innocent people were shipped out. But such as it was, life did go on. Young people got together whenever we could to escape the gloom. We had to do something to escape the morbid reality and uncertain future. There were romantic interludes. Love was a great outlet for the pain that each one of us endured. And so the days passed, sometimes hopeful, but mostly desperate. In late 1941, when the official ghetto was formed, we had to have some means of employment. Benjin had a well-known uniform shop who was run by Rosner, who employed a lot of Jews. Rosner was a man with good motives who, while wanting to save the Jews, also profited from our labors. In the ghetto, I too worked in Rosner's shop. In the first section, I had no idea how to sew furs, but my co-workers taught me how to work the machines. I worked 6 days a week, 8 hours a day. I received no salary for my labor, but I was a useful person for the German Reich, so I had temporary exemption from deportation. We never knew what shocking news we would hear when we got up in the morning. Who was snatched out of a particular building to be shipped to a camp? Who was shot in the street at the slightest provocation? At this point, we had already started hearing news about Auschwitz-Birkenau, its gas chambers and ovens. Where could we go? Was any country willing to accept us? Were any doors open to us? We had no means of defending ourselves, no weapons. We were helpless and scared. The ghetto walls were constantly moving in closer, making the area tighter and tighter, resulting in people moving to smaller and smaller quarters. Several of my uncles, my mother's siblings, have been caught in the street, leaving their wives and children without resources. We were resettled to a 2-room apartment in Benjin, and rather than sharing it with strangers, all our aunts and their siblings and their children moved in with us. We were 15 people living in 2 rooms. Unbelievably, we had existed under these conditions for almost 3.5 years. In August 1943, deportations began again. On that fateful day of August 23rd, we were awakened by knocks on our door, told to dress in our good clothing, take 1 suitcase each, filled with whatever valuables we still had, and assemble outside, for we were being resettled. Resettled? What a joke! Did they really think we were blind and deaf to the looming reality? I knew where we were going. But I was resigned. I was glad the end was near.
I wanted it to come soon because our conditions were unbearable. The end was inevitable. I wanted it to be over. After hours of being assembled outside, we were told to board the cattle car train with guards pointing and pushing their guns at us, shouting, "Verfluchte Juden, los, los!" The trip lasted several hours. Auschwitz-Birkenau was near Benjin, but it seemed like an eternity. Each wagon was packed to the brim with people. Mommy, Bronya, Marek, and I were with several aunts and their children. We were all together to share our fate, whatever that might be. There was not enough room for everyone to sit, so younger people were standing up. The heat and lack of air were unbearable. The pail standing in the center of the wagon was beginning to fill with urine and feces. The stench was making people nauseous. As a result, they were vomiting. My little brother, frightened, clung to my mother. Mommy had dressed him in knickers and put a little cap on his head to make him look older than his age, hoping he would be spared the fate of very young children. We were all in double layers of clothing because we could not carry very much with us. This increased our discomfort. It was August and the wagon had no windows, therefore no air. We were suffocating. Suddenly, the train came to a halt. Dazed, everyone tried to rise, but many fell back, their legs cramped from sitting so uncomfortably for hours. People tried to help one another. These were our brothers and sisters who had lived together in the same town and now waited for the unknown. We got out or fell out of the train half dead to face SS men with their dogs and guns pointing at us. Our fates were being determined right then and there. With the flick of a finger, we were sent either left or right. It soon became apparent which side was bad, as this was where women with very young children and babies were directed, obviously to the gas chamber. My little brother was sent to the side with the men whose fate was being determined separately. Mommy, Bronya, 2 aunts, and I found ourselves on the supposedly good side. One of my aunts, who had married my youngest uncle, David, had a 1-year-old son who was immediately taken away. She was told to go to our side. Another aunt, Regina Zafferstein, who would eventually become a heroine of Auschwitz, joined us. Another aunt, Tonya, went with her 2 daughters, Yosela and a beautiful little Rowan. The selection was finally over. We were told to march in a certain direction. We were told to walk quickly to the right for a disinfection or delousing. But before this, the first thing on the agenda was the most dehumanizing experience. We were told to undress, and then our hair was completely cut and shaved to the point of baldness, followed by the shaving of our pubic area with legs spread. All this was done with Nazi guards standing around watching and laughing while we felt like screaming from humiliation. Tattooing our arms followed. My number was 50887, with a triangle underneath indicating Jewish. These numbers on our left arm were to be our identity for the next 2 years. When the shaving and tattooing were finished, we were told to march to the showers. As we entered this cavernous bath area, I was sure that the spigots on the ceiling, which supposedly were showers, would at any moment release some poisonous substance and kill us. When water actually sprayed down on us, a sigh of relief reverberated in the hollow room. But we were still naked. After we dried our bodies with some rags, we were told to stand in line for our attire. From a bin full of dresses, the prisoners in charge provided us with some clothing, randomly selected, regardless of what weight or height we were. A tall girl could get a short dress and a short girl a long one. After we received our wardrobe, which in addition to the dress, included 1 pair of panties and wooden shoes, some girls began to trade with others for better-fitting clothing. But where was my family? Mommy, Bronya, and my aunts? When we finally found each other, we burst out laughing, embraced one another. We were a sight to behold. Tragedy meets comedy. We were ordered to follow a couple to a different part of the camp where we were going to be housed. It turned out to be the last barrack, Block 27. As we approached this barrack, my heart stood still. Beyond the barbed wire wall, which was only about 30 feet from the barrack, stood the crematorium with its tall chimney exuding smoke. Who knew which of my loved ones or my friend's flesh was burning, We were so close we could feel the stench. We were quickly distracted by an order to stand in line in front of Block 27. A German SS woman appeared to supervise, assigning us to different places to work. Mommy found favor in the supervisor's eyes and was chosen to work in the Bashkuka, a very prestigious job. Mommy, of course, pleaded with the SS woman to include her daughters and sister-in-law in this line of work. She succeeded. We were especially thrilled about being able to stay together. We were still a family, unlike the rest of the people in our barrack. We also learned that 2 other mothers from our transport successfully entered the work camp. My Aunt Regina was chosen to work in the Union Verka ammunition factory. Other women were directed to all kinds of different jobs. We then proceeded to enter the barrack, which contained 2-tier bunks attached to one another, stretching all throughout the room. In the center of the room, also serving as a divider, was an oven-like structure. We all made the run for the bunks, wanting to be near each other. Mommy, Bronny, and I took one of the lower tiers. Thin, straw-filled mattresses and flimsy, ragged blankets for our only bedding. The weather was still warm, thus cold was not a threat yet. But hunger? Oh, hunger. Hunger was already bothersome as we had not had any food the entire day. Our block leader, came out of her room, which was at the entrance to the barrack. Her name was Emma, and she shared the room with her mother. All the block elders were Slovakian Jews who had been brought to Auschwitz in 1941 and practically built the camp. They faced many terrible ordeals, and most of them perished. Those who survived, however, became kapos, supervisor of commandos or work groups, and were very tough and mean to us newcomers. They expressed their resentment of us who had been at home while they were being persecuted by cursing and even beating us. We couldn't believe that Jewish women could treat their poor Jewish sisters this way. But perhaps this was their way of surviving. Emma, the block leader, welcomed us with a few choice words that seemed more like threats and warnings to do as she said or else, and pointed to the direction of the crematorium. Now, she said, you will all assemble for Zalapel roll call, and then you will receive your evening rations. We were starving, and so welcomed this announcement gratefully. But little did we know how long Zalapel would last. Standing on the road in front of the barrack, we could see the occupants of the other barracks also assembled for a pal. After 2 hours, a buzz of joy was heard. From far off, we saw a large kettle being carried by 2 inmates. The food is here. Hunger is such a strong sensation. When your stomach is empty, you cannot think of anything else. We waited in line for our soup, bread, and coffee. Some pushed and shoved to be near the kettle, only to be smacked by a Polish inmate named Zosia. The thin soup was ladled into our metal bowls. A small square of clay-like bread was shoved into our hands. What kind of soup was this? What was in it? It tasted horrible, but at the same time, delicious. Anything was welcome. We bit into the bread and devoured it all. These rations were to last us until tomorrow evening, but I was too hungry to worry about tomorrow, something I would learn to do later. We also later learned that the bottom of the kettle contained thicker soup, which was more filling. Eventually, some people waited at the end of the line to receive the thicker soup, but often, by the time they reached the kettle, there was no soup left. We couldn't win. After we returned home, hungry, exhausted, we then proceeded back to the barracks. Hungry, exhausted, lights were turned off, we fell asleep in our new home. My mother woke up after a while. I didn't know what time it was, but she was screaming, Mareshku, Mareshku, where are you? She couldn't stop sobbing. Bronya and I tried to quiet her down and assure her that our little brother was surely in the men's camp, alive and well. We huddled together, grateful to have one another. We needed to get some rest, for we would have to be up early for Zalapel and work, whatever that would be. It seemed as if we had just fallen asleep, our bones aching from the harsh bunks, when we were jolted awake by the voices of the Schreiberin. Los, los, Zalapel, Zalapel! We lined up in long rows. We were chilled, hungry, and tired. We stood again for hours, and eventually kettles with water and coffee arrived. It was ladled into our red metal bowls. How I wished I hadn't eaten the entire bread ration the previous night. I would never do it again. One had to think about tomorrow. My mother pulled out the sliver of bread she had saved from the night before and handed each of us a piece. And Mommy, how lucky we are to have you to take care of us. After we returned home, hungry, exhausted, knowing that hours of appels awaited us, but we also looked forward to our evening rations. We continued our day-to-day life in the same manner, saving one of our rations from the previous night for the next day. One day, when startled awake to get up by the section leader, we discovered to our horror that the bread was gone. I could hardly sleep, that's how strong my hunger pangs were. But I had learned my lesson about eating all my food at one time, and so we had saved it, and now it was gone. I was so angry and devastated. I started to cry. We could have eaten it ourselves, but some dishonest person stole the food that belonged to us. No, dear, Mommy said, trying to pacify me. The person who did this is not the thief. She must have been terribly hungry. Forgive her. During our concentration camp years, we witnessed so many such sad incidents. It was survival, and under these circumstances, people were capable of anything. And yet there was a lot of camaraderie among the inmates, especially those that came together on the same transport. About 6 weeks after our arrival, we faced our first selection. It was already cold outside, mid-October, when we were told to undress and parade naked in front of Dr. Mengele, the so-called Angel of Death, and other SS men with dogs. Luck was a big factor then. If they did not like your appearance, they pointed their sticks to the left, to death. Everyone walked erect, smiling, feigning well-being, hoping that this behavior would convince the SS men. No. They needed to eliminate a certain number of prisoners, and it did not matter to them who the victims were. None of us looked emaciated yet. That would happen later with time. Starvation and illness would do its job, but right now, 30 girls from our blocks and many, many others from other blocks were selected to go to the gas chamber. The rest of us were allowed to live and continue our miserable existence. Is this life worth living? Wouldn't that be easier? Later, I asked myself this question many times, but for now, the three of us were in pretty good shape thanks to Mommy's extra work and our good jobs. But our luck too ran out. Soon, fall passed and winter was at our doorstep. Torturous appels were harder and harder. Sometimes we had to pick people up to prevent them from fainting and falling on the ground. With little clothing, they dragged themselves on the long hike to work. Many times, they were brought back into the camp as corpses on a wheelbarrow, pushed by their fellow inmates. In January 1944, a typhoid epidemic broke out and more than half of the inmates contracted it. Mommy got sick first. Then I became ill. We had very high temperatures and were shivering uncontrollably. Emma, the block leader, told us to go to the camp infirmary. Some infirmary. There were no medications or treatments. You just lay there in lice-infested bunks, one step closer to the crematorium. A short time after we settled into our lice-infested bunks, SS men stormed into the infirmary and ordered us to get up. We knew what was coming. A selection. Nobody budged. The orderlies were running around yelling, "Aussteigen, los, los!" I decided to be the first one to stand up and face the SS man. He wrote down my name and number and told me to go to a certain side. Was it the good side or bad? I had no way of knowing. As more people got up to face the beast, it became apparent that those in bad shape were sent to where I was. Mommy, too, was sent to my side. I don't think she knew the seriousness of the situation. All she cared about is that we were together. And so did I. At least my sister had avoided the selection by remaining on the block. Maybe one of us will be saved. The bad line was getting longer and longer when the selection was finally over. We expected to be loaded out of the infirmary into a truck waiting outside. To our surprise, We were told to go back to bed. When were the SS coming to get us? I really couldn't say when they came, whether it was 2 or 3 or 4 days later, because I had no conception of time. But they did storm into the infirmary with their list of names. Of course, I readied myself to be the first name called, since I was the first whose name was written down. But my name was not first to be called. Neither was it the second or the third. Could they be reading the list from the bottom up? But the agony, I so wished it to be over. Names are called. Hannah Iskovich. That is Mommy. Oh, Mommy, don't leave me. I'm going with you. They will call my name soon. Did I say it out loud? Did I think it? Did I wish it, or did I hope my name would never be called? The list is finished. The people are told to walk to the door and to the truck waiting outside. I hear Mommy's voice crying out to me, Roshu, I'm going to the gas chamber. Try to survive and tell the world. I will, Mommy. I will cry for you, Marek, and everyone else. Then they were gone. And I was still in bed. Why? How? Who intervened? The orderlies couldn't believe I was still there. They stared at me in amazement, and what's more, I was feeling better. My fever broke, but my body was a mess from constantly scratching at the lice. I was beginning to feel hungry. A good sign, I was told. But I couldn't stop crying. Crying for my mommy, my brother, my father, and yes, for me. What was to become of me? Without Mommy, I would not survive. I did not go with her. However, I thought I still have my sister. We will have each other. No such luck. While we were in the infirmary, there was a big selection in every block on the camp. My poor sister was taken to the gas chamber then. Oh, I was really all alone. I didn't want to live. I never could get over the miracle of my name being erased from the list while I was in the infirmary. Years later, someone I ran into from my barrack in Auschwitz thought she had the answer. This is what she told me. When Emma, the block leader, learned that my sister and mother were to be killed, she somehow learned about me and was instrumental in having my name removed from the list. I find it hard to believe. Yes, Emma and her mother did favor us. But how could she have known about me? Emma allowed me to regain my strength and did not assign me to work, but I had to attend the Pell. It was so much harder than before when I had my mother and sister. Now my emotional and physical state made the Pell almost unbearable. In addition, I, like everyone who had typhoid, was now plagued with dysentery, the most unpleasant and difficult condition to manage. You cannot control your bowels, which had terrible consequences. I lost a lot of weight and was a real muscle man. As soon as I lay down on my bunk, I started to cry. I wasn't even hungry, but my sleeping partners kept encouraging me to eat. Suddenly, I heard a familiar voice. She must have been pointed in the direction of my bunk, and there she stood before me, my Aunt Regina with a pint of milk in her hand. Regina, who was working in the Unionwerke ammunition factory, did not contract typhoid. Her factory was far from the camp, and their commando usually got back after dark. But here she stood before me, exhausted from work, walking the entire length of the camp to give me the milk and lift my spirits. My dear, dear aunt, how good you make me feel. How grateful I am for having at least you. My aunt's visits every other day with bread or milk helped me physically and mentally. I managed to work and produce, and snapped out of my depression a bit. I look forward to my aunt's visits several times a week. One day, a Slavic Jewish inmate entered our barrack in charge of Außerkommando. I was one of the unlucky ones. The Außerkommando was the most difficult and treacherous of all the jobs, and many times people were brought back into the camp as corpses. There were different kinds of jobs within the Außerkommando, but to begin with, we had to walk several kilometers outside the camp perimeter, and our feet were sore and swollen. One of the jobs I remember was moving railroad tracks from one place to another, a Herculean job even for the strong and healthy. We lined up about the foot apart on either side of the track and were told to pick them up on the count of 3 and move them to another place. I don't know if those tracks were ever to be used, but I know we were there to be tortured. Another commando I remember was moving large rocks from one place to another. But there was no sense to it. It was cold and I was falling asleep standing up. I hid behind a large rock out of sight of the German guard. I don't know how long I succeeded in doing so and getting some rest. When I was startled awake by a whip over my face, I quickly got to my feet in order to avoid further beating and proceeded with the rock moving. By far, the worst commando I was ever assigned was a slimy, muddy place where our job was to fill wheelbarrows with mud and move them from one place to another. That was a terrible experience. And I promised myself that if I were ever assigned to this commando again, I would not do it, no matter the consequences. I was getting stronger, but one day I didn't feel well. With all my might, I got up and went for a pill, and then to work. I barely made it back into the barrack, lay down on my bunk, and fell asleep instantly. I never made the evening appel. When the girls got back, they told me that Zosha, the Schreiberin, went crazy because one person was missing. She threatened all the girls with the punishment unless they told her who the missing person was. They knew, but did not give me away. Zosha announced that the person, when found, would receive a cruel punishment of 25 lashes at the gate, which usually left the punished in terrible shape. I was grateful to my sister inmates for not betraying me, but couldn't fall asleep all the while thinking how to avoid this punishment. There really was no way out. I would be found out in the morning and taken to the gate for my severe punishment of 25 lashes. No. I decided I would not willingly submit to the punishment. I decided to leave Block 27 and hide in another barrack. It was dusk, and quietly I sneaked outside and ran to the next barrack. I stopped and ran to the next, and the next. Where was I running to? There really was no escape. The wires were electrified. I could run into them and get it over with. Suddenly, I looked up and was reminded of the Germans with guns hovering over the camp from their lookout towers, looking for any unusual movement on the ground. Any second, I expected to hear the sound of gunfire, but there was silence and I kept running. Suddenly, I found myself near the gate connecting the B logger with C. A large group of women was assembled there, apparently ready to be transported out of the camp. I didn't know where they were going, but it didn't matter. I attached myself to this group as inconspicuously as I could and found that they were already counted and ready to be loaded onto the cattle car train. I followed them into one of the cars and lay down in the corner. I was too tired to think and too resigned to worry about where the train was going. For now, I'd escaped the punishment of 25 lashes. And I was very hungry. When some food and water were distributed and the train started moving, I felt very relieved. Nobody knew what our destination was. The place where I wound up was another infamous camp, Bergen-Belsen. There seemed to be a lot of chaos, not like in Auschwitz-Birkenau. The people wandered around everywhere. Suddenly, I noticed a friend, Raquel Zemenovich. As soon as she saw me, she handed me a pencil and pad and said, "You will count the people. You'll be the Schreiberin." There was no real German supervision at this time. It was just survival of the fittest. We former Auschwitz inmates who had went through typhoid and dysentery were the stronger ones, while arrivals from elsewhere were falling like flies from starvation and sickness. Stronger prisoners had to pick up the bodies lying on the ground and throw them into ditches. Raquel took me to some of my friends who had been brought here from Auschwitz several weeks prior and already managed to take charge of one of the barracks. They welcomed me happily, gave me food, and described the overall conditions in the camp. This is what they told me. Food was scarce. They relied on girls who worked in the kitchen to provide them with potatoes or scraps of food they could steal. They asked me to stay with them. I was happy to be with my friends who looked after me because I had just arrived. They were familiar with Bergen-Belsen. It was the beginning of January 1945, and life for me was easier than in Auschwitz-Birkenau. Transports were arriving practically every day. The new arrivals walked around, dazed everywhere. The new arrivals slept on the floor in the barracks, which were not even equipped with bunks. The news from the war front was very encouraging. The Nazis were definitely losing the war. But would anybody survive if it lasted much longer? People were arriving from Auschwitz-Birkenau having walked for 6 weeks on what are now known as death marches. Many people collapsed along the way or were shot by the guards when they could no longer walk. With every group arriving from Auschwitz, I looked for familiar faces and recognized many, but not my aunt. Where was my Aunt Regina? Had anyone seen her? She'd show up eventually, I knew, and we'd be reunited. Suddenly, a commotion erupted in the camp. The German guards were following each other and walking toward the exit of the camp. I thought, what's going on? Something was happening. The capos were joining the guards and leaving too. Were we also free to leave? We were free to do so, but to follow our enemy and be a part of their entourage was not an option. Some prisoners left, but I and many others stayed and waited. Something was happening. We walked near the exit for his sign. From far off, I saw a tall silhouette in a cape and beret. I thought, it's my father. He looked just like him from afar. After all, I had never really seen my father dead, and there were rumors that the men taken out of Pilsudska were led away someplace and were alive and well. Now he's come to liberate us. His voice came through a megaphone. Prisoners, stay where you are. The British Army is here to free you. And as he came closer and closer, I realized this was not my father. My imagination did that to me. He turned out to be a forerunner for the British Army, which arrived soon after. We are free. We are free. What do we do now? It came so suddenly. It was, we found out, April 15, 1945. Our liberators, the British Army, were shocked with what they found in Bergen-Belsen. The mass grave that exuded stench from the decomposing bodies. The half-dead lying on the ground, pleading for help. They seemed to know they were liberated, but for so many, help came but too late. There were some Germans left behind in the camp. I guess the big wheels who left did not bother to look for them and take them along. The British gathered up the Germans, stripped them of their guns, and loaded them onto a truck waiting outside. As they were led away, we started screaming at them, throwing whatever we could find in their direction. Was this our revenge? Perhaps if we had guns, we would have aimed them at the Germans. But shoot them? We doubt it. Very few of us were capable of killing another human being. But who knows? I was glad we were not given the opportunity. The British were very kind to us prisoners. They set up tents with beds and together with the Red Cross unit, proceeded to pick up the sick lying on the ground and put them on the field beds they set up. There was food available, but unfortunately our shrunken and sensitive intestines could not tolerate the rich food, which many so anxiously devoured. The result was devastating. People were dying of dysentery. The next course of action was to liquidate the camp entirely and place us in regular housing. They placed us in a group of buildings within the vicinity. Some very sick people went to Sweden, which offered to nurse them back to health. What a wonderful gesture on the part of the Swedish nation. The rest of us were allowed to roam freely, looking for familiar faces, friends, family from our hometowns. Signs were posted everywhere. Some prisoners came from places that had already been liberated. Others went back to their hometowns, only to find Polish people living in their homes. Occasionally, surviving relatives found one another, overjoyed, but saddened by the loss of the rest of his family. I stayed in Bergen-Belsen. As one of few prisoners who spoke some English, I was immediately recruited to be an interpreter for the frustrated English who could not communicate with the survivors. My meager knowledge of the language made me important enough to receive extra rations and goodies like sardines and chocolate. I was given a nice room and took in 2 cousins and 1 girlfriend to share it with me. In June, a distant cousin named David arrived, en route in searching for his siblings. He asked me who was alive from my family, to which I replied, "You know my father was killed in Benjin at the beginning of the war. My mother and sister were gassed in Auschwitz, and my brother we never heard from again after arriving in Auschwitz. All my uncles, as far as I know, are dead. All of my aunts, except for my Aunt Regina, are dead as well. I am waiting for Regina here because if I leave, we may miss each other." "What?" he asked. "Don't you know what happened to Regina Zalverstein?" My heart pounding, I answered no. After a short pause, he said, "She is dead. She was hanged in Auschwitz-Birkenau on January 5th, together with 3 other girls." I started to cry. My last hope for the only member of my family to be alive was gone. I was truly all alone in the world. I didn't want to live. I hadn't known about my aunt's clandestine activities in Auschwitz. Regina was a part of the Sonderkommando uprising on October 7th. For 8 months, she had been working in the Unienwerke ammunition factory. Together with 3 other girls, Alla Gertner, also from Benjin, Rosa Rabota, and Esther Washburn, they smuggled bits of ammunition powder into the seams of their dresses and into specially sewn pockets. They then passed it on to the Sonderkommando, whose plan it was to blow up one of the crematoria, which would lead to an uprising within the camp. It was a very dangerous and secretive operation. The 4 women agreed to this dangerous mission and suffered the consequences. But I am sure they had no regrets. The Sonderkommando did manage to blow up one crematorium and shove 1 SS man inside. The Nazis then proceeded to investigate the whole matter and find the source of the ammunition powder. They started with beautiful Alla Gertner, who, despite being tortured mercilessly, refused to give up any information about the involvement of others. Nevertheless, the SS eventually implicated Regina and the 2 other girls. The whole SS, the whole Sonderkommando, was to be gassed as well. On January 5th, 13 days before Auschwitz was evacuated due to the approaching Russian army, the entire population of the camp was told to go where the gallows were waiting to hang these 4 women and were forced to witness their executions. Regina, Alla, Rosa, and Esther went to the gallows with their heads held high. They died heroines trying to fight back. There are monuments in Yad Vashem, Israel, Germany, and articles in the annals of the history of Auschwitz-Birkenau which hail these 4 women and the Sonderkommando of the uprising as heroes. I am so proud of it, you and Regina, and will never forget you, and neither will the world. David, the man who had informed me about my aunt's fate, asked me to go to Schwandorf with him, a city in Germany in the American zone, which had set up a transit building for survivors. The place was buzzing with survivors, coming, going, searching. In a way, I felt like I was part of a community. The community of people who, like me, suffered enormously, lost everyone and everything, and did not know in which direction their lives would go. One day, a man named Liebeck Reckwick appeared. He was a well-known violin virtuoso. I had met him once during the war. Liebeck and I somehow connected and embraced. I hardly knew him, but he was a familiar face and knew my parents. Liebeck was 12 years older than I, and very good looking. My parents would have approved of him. We continued to see each other, and after 6 weeks, decided to get married. Our wedding was a huge affair. Everyone was invited to this big celebration of the first marriage of 2 survivors after the liberation. There was music and dancing and joy expressed from the survivors who came from surrounding areas to celebrate and bring little gifts for the bride and groom. Throughout my life, I have met people who were at my wedding, and they remembered me, but I, of course, did none of the 500 strangers who were there. Was it possible for Liebeck and me to know happiness after all we had been through? Would I be able to have children? Now that I've survived, I wanted all the things that human beings are entitled to. I would go on living, but as it turns out, would never overcome my past, and could never stop talking about it with my fellow survivors. I never stopped feeling lonely. Abandoned first by my father, then my mother, sister, brother, and finally my aunt. I never stopped feeling guilty for having survived, and they did not. But now I had the husband to share my life with, one who could understand me because he had been there. In 1946, when Rose and her husband arrived in America, few people spoke about the Holocaust. Survivors were too close to their trauma to discuss it. However, Rose's tattooed 50887 remained a clear visual reminder of her experience in Auschwitz. She often caught people staring at her number, and then people finally started asking her questions. So, in the 1950s, Rose began to answer those questions and became committed to Holocaust education. Rose adored her family, her 2 daughters, and many grand and great-grandchildren. This family, which grew to 4 generations during her life, proved that Hitler's mission to eradicate Jews from the planet failed. Rose recognized that she had a blessed life after the Holocaust. However, she worked hard in her new country and contributed to society as a witness, an educator, a career woman, and as a wife, mother, and grandmother. It was important to Rose to share her history and legacy of horror with her family and the public. And while Rose felt fortunate to have had such a successful life and family after the Holocaust, the trauma and loss of the Holocaust never left her. Rose never forgot her mother's parting words, "Try to survive and tell the world." While Rose left us in 2006, she also left us with the memory of a woman who survived the unsurvivable. A woman who lived in a place designed to kill. Not only did she lived life to the fullest and never sought to revenge the murder of her family. She conquered the Nazi ideology of hate and destruction by speaking the truth of the Holocaust while living a life of joy, love, and creation. Rose once said, "When my time comes to leave this earth, I know that my spirit will meet with those of my parents, siblings, and the rest of my martyred family. And together we will watch over our loved ones here on earth. I will leave this world a happy woman." Rose, thank you for sharing your truth of the Holocaust with us for over 50 years. I hope that I am able to do justice to your history and help keep your loving memory alive.
My name is Erica Gerald. I have had a safe, secure, and happy life with my parents and 3 sisters, including having the great fortune to receive a quality education and to go on to college and pursue my dreams. Like me, Rosalie Lebovich Simon had a happy home life. She loved school and dreamed of the future. The Nazis stole that future from her during Passover in 1944, when her family were forced out of their home and into a ghetto. Rosalie and her 4 sisters would eventually survive the ghetto and 3 concentration camps, including Auschwitz-Birkenau. Her father also survived. Her mother and brother did not. On July 8th, 2021, Rosalie Lebovich Simon welcomed me, a complete stranger, into her home. We ended up chatting for hours. I was amazed that Rosalie is still willing to relive those horrible crimes committed by the Nazis. She has shared her history with so many people over the years, and she will continue to tell the truth of the Holocaust for as long as she can. Rosalie Lebovich Simon saw her mother and brother at the gates of Auschwitz-Birkenau for the last time. At the age of 12, the Nazis selected her for immediate death. In the gas chamber, she escaped that fate, and she refused to die in spite of starvation, disease, and torture. She understands the necessity of telling this history. It has been over 75 years since the liberation of Auschwitz-Birkenau, and people still deny the Holocaust. Anti-Semitism is alive and strong. The 11 Jewish people killed at the Tree of Life Synagogue on October 27, 2018, is only one recent example of violence against Jewish people. Rosalie told me that while recovering in a hospital, a nurse told her, "I hate Jews." Stunned, Rosalie asked her why. The nurse said that she had once had a bad experience with a Jew. Rosalie asked, "You had one bad experience with a Jewish person, and now you hate all Jews. Let me tell you my story." Rosalie explained her experience of the Holocaust to a nurse who was supposed to take care of her. Rosalie's story changed that nurse's life. The nurse came back to see Rosalie the next day, apologetic and wanting to learn more about the Holocaust. Rosalie, who has shared her history with many people over the years, including school children, college students, and many others, has changed many lives for the better, including mine. Even though Rosalie witnessed so many crimes against humanity and had to fight for her life, she is not bitter. Rosalie is full of love, compassion, and forgiveness. It is amazing that this woman who has seen so much horror can love and express the importance of human kindness and compassion in a world that can be so cold. Rosalie survived one of the greatest acts of hate, the Holocaust, and yet she gently told us she holds no hate for others. No hate for Germans, no hate for Americans. The Nazis destroyed the life she knew, and they very nearly destroyed her, yet she walks through life without hate in her heart. Here is what you should know about Rosalie. She has a tender heart and passion for life. She greets you with a hug and fills the room with glee. Her voice is loving, and her smile is sweet. Despite all the pain she has been through, she manages to laugh. She will offer you the second cookie. She speaks thoughtfully with pauses inside of her sentences and will put her arm around you when you take a walk. She cares deeply about her family. She is the gold standard of bravery. It was the most special opportunity to spend the day with Rosalie. I have more respect for her than I could ever put into words. So I will share her words, teaching us to be upstanders and not bystanders, as she has said to countless people of all ages. This is Rosalie's story. kinderlich, gedenkst Heira, was wir After about 8 weeks in the ghetto, around the end of May or the beginning of June of 1944, we received orders to congregate in a certain area. We gathered our luggage and our few bundles and walked to the trains. Cattle cars were waiting for us. They shoved 80 people into one car, 80 into the next. I happened to be the 80th first person, so I was pushed into another car without any of my family around me. I was 12 years old. Not only was I traumatized by the separation from my family, but also I had no food. I had to depend on strangers for food that they needed for their own families on this journey into the unknown. The cattle car was very crowded. We were shoved into the cattle cars like animals being sent to slaughter, but they would not have put so many animals in one cattle car for fear of injuring them and not being able to sell them. We could not lie down. A bucket in the corner served as our toilet. Imagine 80 people going in one bucket in front of everybody. I leaned against someone's shoulder, crying bitterly. In my depression, all I remember is the silence of the people, the whistle of the engine blowing, the noise of the wheels against the road tracks, and the train, traveling farther and farther from my home to an unknown destination. I was born in 1931. I had 4 sisters, 1 brother, and a mother and father. We lived in a town called Terezka in Czechoslovakia, which was occupied by Hungary in 1939. My father, Israel Lebovich, was a kind man helping others less fortunate. Many times he invited a poor person from the synagogue for a Sabbath dinner. He was always busy tending to his business and whatever else he was involved in. Therefore, he had little time to spend with the family. However, on Sabbaths and the holidays, the whole family was together, celebrating. My mother, Regina, was a homemaker, taking care of a household, a husband, and 6 children. She put in so much hard work and effort each day preparing meals and kept the house in order. I remember waking up in the morning. The fire was already lit, and Mother had prepared breakfast for the family before getting us off to school. I was close to my sisters. As the youngest, I was well taken care of by them. Helen, my oldest sister, was a professional designer and dressmaker. She used to design in Cateron patterns. She made beautiful dresses for children as well as for adults. People from all over town used to come to her with their fabrics. Helen was very smart and an avid reader. On many occasions, she used to gather us around and talk to us about her books. I was fascinated by the stories and could listen to them for hours. My second oldest sister, Charlotte, was very beautiful.
She was my mother's right hand, always pitching in and helping out with housework. When my mother was away for a few hours, Charlotte was in charge, taking care of the family. Lenka, my third sister, was the model. Besides attending school, she had also taken a course in designing and sewing. She used to make beautiful clothing for herself and the family, as well as helping Helen with her work. No matter how much work Lenka had put into the day, in the evening, after work, she dressed, styled her hair, and went to meet her friends. She never seemed fatigued. Raisi, my fourth sister, was the brain. My mother depended on her with the shopping. Raisi was a top student in school and excelled in math. She received a cash award for her scholastic achievements. I was so proud of her. William was the fifth child and my one and only brother. He was a year older than I. He was tall, very skinny, with big dark eyes and blonde hair. When he was young, he contracted a sickness that was diagnosed as rheumatic fever. The rheumatic fever developed into a heart condition. We all loved him and could not do enough for him. I was the youngest child in the family. Less than 2 months earlier, on the 6th day of Passover, April 14 of 1944, the Hungarian police knocked on our door. They ordered us to pack our most essential belongings and to gather the next day on a local farm that belonged to a Jewish family. This was a nightmare. We cried, our lives were being shattered. There are no words to describe the extent of the shock that my parents felt when they were forced to leave their house for which they had worked all their lives and to go into the unknown with their 6 children. At the farm, we stood in line with our bundles around us, along with the rest of the town's Jewish people. Listening to the children crying was heart-wrenching. To my surprise, I saw my former teacher, Mr. Pallady, and the fact he was in charge. I could not believe that. He told us that whatever jewelry we had in our possession would later be taken away anyway, and in addition, we would be punished. He also wanted a share of Jewish valuables. So we felt we had no choice. We handed over everything. I could not believe that this nice teacher, or so I thought, turned out to be such an evil and greedy person. Later on that night, we were loaded onto the trains and taken to a ghetto located in Matazalga, Hungary. This ghetto was overcrowded with thousands of people. There was no place for us to sleep. Therefore, we were sent outside to sleep in a cemetery, where we slept for several nights. After that, we settled in an attic until we were deported. The sounds of the whistle and the wheels were like cries for help, but the world turned a deaf ear. However, I did not expect that for most of us, this was intended to be our last fight. Even today, when I hear the noise of a train moving on the railroad tracks and hear the whistle of the engine blowing, I am still reminded of that train ride. After a few days, the train finally stopped. The doors were unlocked, and immediately the screaming started. Fast, fast, get out, raus, verfluchte Juden, out, you cursed Jews. Dogs were barking, I had no idea where I was. I jumped off the train and united with my family. Later on, I found out that we had arrived at Auschwitz-Birkenau. I looked around and saw tall chimneys with burning flames coming out of the tops. I didn't understand the meaning of it all. Then I heard my mother say, in a very sad tone of voice, who knew that they had crematoriums? How did she know? It must have been Friday because she continued saying, I'll not light the Sabbath candles tonight, let Marika do it. She seemed to have been angry with God. As it turned out, she did not have to make a decision about lighting the candles. The Nazis took care of that. They made the decision for her. My mother, 45 years old, was put into the gas chamber where she choked to death. And then her body was burned to ashes in the crematorium. We were ordered to leave our luggage behind. I don't care about any of the valuables or possessions that they took away from us. However, I would have liked to have saved some photographs. I have no photographs of my mother or brother. It is as if the Nazis have erased their very existence. I try to hold on to their faces in my memory and in my heart. Thousands of people were climbing down from the cattle cars. I was scared and confused. Total chaos surrounded us. Trucks were lined up for those people who could not walk and who were therefore unfit for labor. My friend, Mira Farkash, who was on the train with us, had a severe case of stomach pain and she couldn't walk. So she was ordered onto the truck with her sister and mother. Remembering Mira takes me back to a time when we were in a school play together, probably in the 3rd grade. Some of her lines were questions for the wise owl. Wise owl, wise owl, how long will I live? Please tell me that I will live a long life. The wise owl responded, yes, you will live to be 70 or 80. Mira happily responded, good, wise owl, good. It turned out that the wise owl was wrong. Mira was on the train with us. Her life ended at the age of 12, on the day of her arrival at Auschwitz-Birkenau. The selections commenced. Mothers were holding on to their children. Mothers, children, the elderly were all ordered to go to the left. My mother and I were sent to the left with the others. The left was for people unfit for labor. My 4 sisters, my father, and my brother were sent to the right. Some Jewish inmates who had been in Birkenau for months were ordered to help the SS guards keep order. One quietly told my sister, Razi, throw your eyeglasses down. He knew apparently that the person was not worthy of living. If she needed eyeglasses, mother asked me, how old are you? I said, 12. He said, if they ask, say you are 16 years old. Some mothers were secretly told to leave their children behind or to hand them over to the grandparents. First of all, no one knew why they were being told this, and then, of course, they did not want to abandon their children, so they walked to the left. Masses of people had been unknowingly straight to the gas chambers. This was along with the people who had been taken in the trucks. Some 440,000 Jewish men, women, and children were deported from Hungary and Hungarian-occupied territories between May 15 and July 8, 1944. This was the time when my family and I had arrived. As many as 10,000 of us were gassed each day soon after our arrival at Auschwitz-Birkenau. They announced on a loudspeaker that older people and children would go to the left and receive more bread. I believed this. My mother and I were sent to the left, my 4 sisters to the right. I was walking with my mother, holding on to her hand. Then, without saying a word of explanation or giving her a kiss, I ran to the right to find my sisters, totally unaware of where my mother was going. I was not abandoning my mother. This was a spontaneous action. I was intent on reuniting my sisters with my mother so we could all be together. None of us knew that those on the left were heading towards the gas chambers. Call it instinct, luck, or God. I have no explanation whatsoever. I was 12 years old at that time. Unfortunately, we could not return to my mother. The SS guards with their guns were watching us. As a result, I had to stay with my sisters. I was devastated at not being with my mother as well. I never saw my mother again. As I think back, I wonder, since she mentioned the crematoriums when we had arrived, that she realized that she was walking towards the chimneys. My mom may have wondered, where is Rosalie? I wondered if she turned around looking for me, or if she just continued walking. I do remember it was as if she was in a daze, walking silently, step by step, looking straight ahead. Perhaps she did not notice that I had left her. She had no power to protect me. Once she realized where she had wound up, she must have been happy that I was not with her. She mentioned once how lucky were those people who had no children. My mother could not bear to hear children crying. At least I spared her the pain of watching her child dying. On the way to find my sisters, I saw my father standing in line with my brother William. My father handed me a piece of bread. I found out later that my 13-year-old brother, William, was taken from my father and ordered to go to the left. Sadly, he met the same fate as my mother. My beautiful, innocent 13-year-old brother, who all his short life was watched over and pampered, died alone during the last moments of his life, with no family members around him. This is another heartbreaking memory that keeps me up many nights, soaking my pillow in tears, the whole scene. The way they died is still in front of me. Having been separated from my sisters later during one of the selections, I can feel the pain he must have felt when he was taken away from my father. My father told us, after the war, that he was forever sorry he told the SS guards the truth about William's age. He thought that William would be treated better as a child. He had no idea that the children were being gassed. None of us knew. My father felt guilty all the years after. William, a sick child, probably would not have survived hard labor and starvation anyway. After selections, the victims sent to the left were told they were going to take showers. They were ordered to enter a building, remove their clothing, and to put the clothes together in one place. In order to find them on their way out from the showers, the SS did this in order to avoid panic. It is painful beyond the words to describe what must have gone on behind locked doors once the poison gas was released. I can visualize the screaming and panic of the grown-ups and the little children suffocating, desperately trying to save themselves. It is horrifying to imagine parents going through this agony twice. Once for themselves, and another time in their hearts for their children before they finally died. The Nazis were worse than beasts in the wilderness. Beasts kill other animals for food to survive. The Nazis took pleasure in seeing the suffering and pain inflicted upon us and our innocent children. In their eyes, the Jews were worthless creatures. Auschwitz-Birkenau in eastern Poland was the perfect place for murder. Surrounded by electric barbed wire fences, we could not escape. Even if we had found a way, we were isolated. There was no place for us to run. The flames in the ovens burnt all day and all night. Pits for the overflow of bodies burned too. To remain alive, we had to be of some use to the Nazis. If we could work, we worked until they starved us or worked us to death. Dr. Mengele and the others who did the selecting had their pick of strong, able-bodied men and women. Why would I, a 12-year-old child, be spared? They had absolutely no use for me. It is truly a miracle that I managed to stay alive. After I joined my sisters, we were directed to a building where we were ordered to undress. After we undressed, our bodies were violated. Male inmates shaved our heads in every area where hair grew. It was most degrading and dehumanizing to expose myself in front of all those men and to be touched by men. We had been sheltered, and innocent women to be naked in front of men was a devastating experience for us, but we felt we had no other choice but to do what we were told. Especially with the SS guards all around watching us with their guns and whips in their hands. We were a sight to behold. Thousands of naked bodies with shaved heads. We hardly recognized each other. We didn't look like human beings anymore. Next, Jewish inmates who had previously been transported to Auschwitz poured disinfectant all over our bodies and directed us to the showers. They did this under the watchful eyes of the SS. We were later told that these shower heads released gas or water. I did not know if this was true or if they were trying to scare us. Every time I was led through the showers, I looked up to see if water or gas was coming out, wondering if this was the day of my death. I was happy to see the water. It did not matter if it was hot or cold. It had been a long time since we had left home and had a chance to bathe. Really, all that mattered is that I had been spared for another day. After our showers, we were handed blue and white striped dresses. They were clean and had been disinfected. We dressed in these ill-fitting striped dresses and marched to our assigned barracks. I was given a number that was printed on a band of cloth and glued to the top left side of my dress. My name was non-existent from then on. I was Hotling 20629. On the day we arrived in June 1944, it was raining. I was both thirsty and hungry. I held my mouth under the roof to get some water. I suddenly felt a slap across my head. I turned around and asked the woman why she was hitting me. She gave me another slap and screamed at me. Here you don't ask questions, do you understand? I learned fast to keep my mouth shut, no matter what. Beatings occurred at the slightest provocation, sometimes for no reason at all. The barracks they took us to in Birkenau were about 60 feet long by 25 feet wide, with rows of 3-tiered wooden bunks on each side with a narrow walkway in between. We were packed in like canned sardines, 10 to 12 women on one tier measuring 6 by 6 feet. The way we lay down is the way we stayed all throughout the night. We had no room to turn around. We were awakened at dawn for Zolotale, or a roll call. If someone was sick and stayed behind in the barrack, that person was badly beaten. We had to be a roll call, sick or well. daily food consisted of black coffee in the morning and soup full of garbage for lunch. I have no idea what was in the soup. It was so horrible that I found it impossible to swallow, no matter how hungry I was. Dinner was a slice of bread and 2 rotten little potatoes. Many times I asked myself, should I save 1 potato for breakfast? I was never able to save a potato. First of all, there was the danger that someone would steal it, and second, the temptation to eat it was too strong, so I ate it. I remember thinking, if I ever get out of this hell alive, all I wish for in life is to have enough potatoes. My wish came true. I do have enough potatoes and then some. I still love potatoes. Twice a day, at their designated time, we were marched to the bathroom. The latrine was a long building with a line of openings on both sides with a narrow walkway in between. There was 1 latrine for 30 to 32,000 women. We were permitted to use the latrines only at certain hours of the day. We stood in line to get in this tiny building, knee-deep in excrement. As we all suffered from dysentery, we could rarely wait until our turn came and soiled our ragged clothes, which never came off our bodies, thus adding to the horror of our existence by the terrible smell which surrounded us like a cloud. We had no toilet paper, no soap, and no toothbrush. We were degraded, stripped of every bit of our human dignity. I recall that I developed diarrhea. Because it was not yet our turn to go, I had only one alternative and could do nothing about this but soil myself. I felt degraded and ashamed. I burst out crying, yet I had to put my dignity aside. The will to survive took over. And my sister Lenka, who was on the bunk with me, tried to comfort me. She helped me to take care of the situation by sneaking out of the barrack to get her water from a puddle left on the ground by that morning's rain. At night, if we needed to use the bathroom, a bucket was placed outside for that purpose. Whoever happened to be there when it was full was ordered to carry it to the bathroom to be emptied. I had the honor a few times. The bucket spilled all over my hands, and I had no way to wash the excrement off. It is a wonder I did not die by that bacteria alone, besides everything else designed to kill me. At least we did not have to worry about having our periods. Because of malnutrition and stress, none of the women menstruated. I did not get my first period until after the war at the age of 14. During the day, we were forced to sit or lie outside of the barracks without any food or water. My lips were blistered from the hot sun. We lay outside on the ground, spread out like cattle in a drought. I recall one day, after hours in the hot sun, we were lined up for Zalabin. I felt so weak that I wanted to faint. I kept crouching down. I could not stand on my feet anymore. My sister Charlotte, who was behind me, held me up until we were counted and permitted to go back to our barracks. Night after night, I witnessed the flames spurting out of the crematoria. On one of my first days in Auschwitz, I asked one of the couples, "What are those flames?" She told me, "This is where they burned your mother, your father, your sisters, and your brothers. Didn't you know? This is where you will wind up soon." At that point, I realized the sad truth. After that, I realized what Auschwitz-Birkenau was all about: a killing place, a hell on earth, in every sense of the word. Our lives were in danger each and every day, day after day. I particularly was in danger because at the age of 12, I was one of the youngest inmates in Auschwitz, small and skinny, unfit for labor. The alternative was the gas chamber. The vile Dr. Mengele, my sister Charlotte, pulled me out of death row more than one time. Hitler and the Nazis' plan was the final solution, that is to get rid of all of the Jews as quickly as possible. Where better to succeed than in Auschwitz-Birkenau, where they had all the necessary equipment available. We were surrounded by a double length of barbed wire, an electric fence illuminated at night with SS guards and watchtowers ready to shoot us if we wandered anywhere near the fence. We were caged in, like animals waiting to be slaughtered. I understand that some women wanted to put an end to their lives. Therefore, they ran to the electric fence. I remember seeing one woman dead near the fence. Her face was covered with flies. One day, I heard a rumor that selections would take place as our barrack was to be transferred to Germany for labor in a munitions factory. This was wonderful news. We were anxious to leave. We had had enough of the flames and the fire, but for me, the rumor was bittersweet. Selections were a matter of grave concern. I desperately wanted to leave this hell, but I was petrified that I would not pass Dr. Mengele's selection because of my age and size. However, I was hopeful. The day arrived. We were ordered to line up, naked, outside. Dr. Mengele arrived. It was Judgment Day. He would decide who should live and who should die. One by one, we had to walk past him. My heart pounded as I came closer to him. I pinched my cheeks to have a healthy color and tried to walk straight. My life was at stake. My sisters went ahead of me. They passed as I approached. He stopped me. He put his hand on my shoulder, turned me around, and asked me how old I was. I remember that when I had arrived at Auschwitz, one of the inmates said to say that I was 16. I answered him that I was 16. Obviously, he did not believe me. He motioned to someone to take me away. A weakness came over my whole body. My worst nightmare had come true. I was led into a room and locked up. At that point, reality set in. I realized that this would be my last day on this earth. I would never see tomorrow. How does a 12-year-old child deal with the thought of being separated from her sisters, facing death in the gas chambers alone? I was overcome with emotion. I could not control my sobbing. Desperately trying to get someone's attention, I kept jumping up and down, frantically scratching at the glass like a little dog knocking on the window and pleading, "Please, somebody, let me out! Don't leave me here! I don't want to die!" I would not accept my fate. I felt as if the room was on fire and I was desperately trying to save myself and escape from burning to ashes. I didn't know which was worse, the separation from my sisters or my death sentence. Both were tragic. For selfish reasons, I wished that I had at least one sister with me to share my fate. I did not want to face that horrible death on my own. Unfortunately, no one heard me. I was forced to confront death. My support and hope were gone. My life was about to end. While I was fighting for my life inside the room, my sisters were fighting for me on the outside. Naked, my sister Charlotte, followed by my other sisters, dared to approach this monster of a man, Dr. Mengele, whom she begged, "Please allow my sister to come with us. We are 5 sisters and want to be together." They risked their lives. He could have very easily said, "How dare you talk to me," and ordered them all to death. We all could have perished. Instead, he said, "If you want to be with your sister, you can go with her, but she cannot go with you." Unfortunately, they had no choice. They had to leave me behind and join the group who were selected for transfer to Germany. I must have been destined to live. Or maybe God heard me because a miracle happened to me. A mother and daughter had also been separated. The mother had passed the selection, but the daughter had not. Dr. Mengele thought the daughter was too tall and skinny, not fit for labor. He ordered her to be locked up with me. A young, red-headed Jewish woman who assisted Dr. Mengele with the selections watched me through the window, hysterically crying. My tears washed my face, dripping down my naked body. I must have touched her heart. She secretly opened the door for me and told me to run. The Nazis kept precise records of the numbers of inmates in the various camp buildings because the mother had volunteered to go to the waiting room to death with her daughter. She could release me as a sort of exchange for the mother. Had she been caught, she probably would have been shot or gone to the gas chambers. I wish I could thank her, but I never saw her again. I hope she survived. I pulled myself together and ran as fast as I could. Luckily, Dr. Mengele was still busy with the selection and didn't notice me running. I didn't know which way to go until I saw a group of women nearby and heard someone call my name. My sisters called to me, "Rosalie, come here." However, they were already standing in a row of 5, the typical way we lined up, and I had no place to stand. They begged the fifth one to move, but she was scared and refused until they explained to her the situation when she finally agreed. I stood in the back, totally exhausted from my emotional ordeal. On the other hand, I was relieved. I was out of the waiting room to death and with my sisters again. Just as I was beginning to calm down, I noticed Dr. Mengele starting selections again. For some reason, he was not yet satisfied with the group he had chosen. Perhaps he was looking for that frail girl whom he had ordered to be locked up. Somehow I stood out from the adults. Most children my age were already dead. Dear God, not again. I thought, if he sees me this time, there is no way out for me. I was again in a panic, shaking with fear. I despaired of ever getting out of there hell alive. I would have to face that horrible death on my own. At first, my sister Lenka tried to comfort me. She said, "Rosalie, don't cry. You will go to a place where you will receive more bread. You'll never go hungry again. Go to the other side and join with the other group." We both knew this was not true. The truth was, I would not live long enough to be hungry. I remember telling her, "I don't want any bread. I want to go with you." I guess the situation was too painful for them to see me in such distress. The line was moving closer to Mengele. I was shaking and crying all over again. "I don't want to go to the gas chamber. I don't want to die." I cried. I knew if he saw me, he would recognize me, and that would surely be the end of me. At that point, Lenka decided that she would make the quick decision and take a risk and smuggle me out directly to the train where the woman had been standing ready to leave Auschwitz. Lenka grabbed my hand, ready to go, but my sister Charlotte took over. She pushed Lenka aside, and holding hands we ran. Never looking back, we crossed the line to the other side and joined with the other group. Charlotte not only wanted to save my life, but also Lenka's. Had the watchtower guards spotted us, we would have been shot or gone to the gas chambers. These experiences will remain with me forever. I will never, ever forget. I was saved again by the help of my courageous sister Charlotte. She risked her life for me. I also owe my life to Lenka for coming up with the idea to save me. I would have never survived without my sisters. We were in a situation where we had to look out for each other's survival as well as our own. We joined the group, ready to leave. I was physically and emotionally exhausted, but also relieved and happy. I would be together with my sisters and out of hell. We boarded the trains, ready to leave Auschwitz. As we traveled, I thought about leaving Auschwitz-Birkenau. There is a God in heaven, I thought. Wherever we are going could never be worse than where we had just left. I felt peaceful again. I don't recall how long we traveled, but we arrived at the concentration camp located in Geislingen on der Steige in Germany. I am not sure how many inmates were in this camp, but it was heaven compared to Auschwitz-Birkenau. Most important, I did not see any flames or chimneys. That realization alone lifted my spirit. Once in Geislingen, it was Sunday, and I didn't have to go to work. I was, however, supposed to go out for Zollappel, but I was not feeling well, so I took a chance and stayed in bed during early morning roll call. The capo found me and began to scream at me, "Raus, du alter Kreuker!" The phrase means, "Get out, you old bug." The capo hit me with her whip all the way outside and until I was in line on the Appellplatz. Another time I was standing in line to get my food. The capo accused me of pushing ahead. This was not true. As a punishment, she gave me less food and ordered me to clean the bathrooms after work for a whole week. As much as I tried to stay out of trouble, it didn't always work. I remember one day, working on a farm picking carrots, I put one in the basket and a bite in my mouth. I ate so many. While we were working there, I heard airplanes and bombings very near to us. We ran to the farmhouse and stood against a house wall. My stomach was full of carrots. The bombs didn't bother me. In Geislingen on der Steige, the roll call was at dawn. By 6 a.m., we had to be at work. We worked in an ammunition factory. We walked for a long time from the Geislingen camp to the munitions factory. We wore our striped dresses and clogs, but we had no coats or underwear, even during the winter months. We had to sing German songs as we marched to and from work. When we walked to work at dawn, I saw milk trucks delivering milk to houses. I remember thinking, my goodness, a normal world is out there. People drink milk. Will we ever return to that? It did not seem real that we would ever be free and live normal lives again. We were divided into two groups, day and night shifts, 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. or 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. We periodically alternated. I was assigned to fixing damaged guns. I worked hard and produced as much as anyone else. My boss was a German civilian, Adolf Schultz. He totally disagreed with Nazi politics. He had a son whom he had disowned because he had joined the Nazi party. He also had a daughter, Elsa, who was a year older than I. Mr. Schultz was 49 years old with a mustache and eyeglasses and small in stature, about 5'5". In my eyes, he was 10 feet tall. This man represented what I would call decency in a human being. After all the evil that I had witnessed when I had gotten to know Mr. Schultz, I started to believe that there were some good people in this world. I recall Mr. Schultz's wise words, Rosita, remember, aushalten, Mund halten, Berg halten, survive. Keep your mouth shut and live through it. He would call me by name. Otherwise, I was referred to as Hotline 20629. He used to look at me and remark sarcastically, Rosalie, you're responsible for this war. He was joking, of course. He said this ironically because Hitler had always blamed the war on the Jews. When I worked the night shifts, he used to tell me, put your head down for a few minutes. While he watched out for the SS guards, sometimes he shared his bread with me. He also helped my sisters. When my sister Helen had asthma and was coughing a lot, he brought her medication that made her feel better. Periodically, an SS woman came to check on us. She was a tall, skinny, blonde woman. She stood there for a few minutes and watched everyone to see if we were working. Once, she noticed 2 potatoes that someone had given Charlotte. She began questioning Charlotte. Whose potatoes are they? Charlotte had to admit that the potatoes belonged to her. The woman began to scream, "Du Schwein! Where did you get those potatoes? Give me your number. I will report you when we return to camp." Charlotte realized that the beating would be waiting for her. She was very upset and started to cry. Mr. Schuffs witnessed the whole scene. He came to her rescue. He walked over to the SS woman and faced her. He was about 7 inches shorter than she, yet he stood up to her on Charlotte's behalf. He said, "If you have a heart, I beg you not to report her. She is a good worker." This took courage on his part. He was not supposed to show compassion towards an inmate. Miraculously, this helped. Nothing happened to Charlotte when she returned to camp. The woman had not reported her, thanks to Mr. Schucks. I cannot say enough about this man. He restored my faith in humanity. We worked in the factory until the Nazis realized that they were losing the war. In March 1945, we were evacuated from Geislingen. Only 2 or 3 weeks before the liberation of Geislingen, we had to move to a lock, a sub-camp of Dachau concentration camp. The lock was almost as bad as Auschwitz, except it didn't have selections in the lock. Upon arrival, the first thing I noticed were huge piles of dead bodies, stacked as high as we see the snow in shopping center parking lots. The conditions in the lock were dreadful. We slept on cement floors without any food, and we didn't have any blankets. We kept close together, keeping some warmth. This was a camp where you couldn't survive for more than 2 weeks. If for 2 weeks, the situation was unbearable. At this time, because of starvation and disease, the piles of dead bodies grew each day. By then, my sisters and I were becoming weaker, but we tried to encourage each other to go on. After 2 or 3 weeks in a lock, we were marched again to the cattle trains. Those who were too frail to walk were shot where they stood. The train traveled on for a day or two. The train finally came to a stop near a field. We heard shots and soldiers came running toward us. As they came closer, they shouted, "We are Americans, you are free!" It was our pleasure to see the Wehrmacht with their hands in the air, surrendering to the Americans. The Americans told us that ditches had been dug a short distance from the railroad tracks. The SS intended to shoot us and bury us in these ditches. It was our luck that we were liberated just in time. We were overjoyed. Oh, I could not believe that we were finally free. The survivors hugged, they kissed the American soldiers. It was our dream come true, a miracle. After I settled down, my first thought was about my mother and how she had died. I did not know about my father or brother. I wondered if they had survived. Assuming them all dead, who would we come home to? I cried and cried. Now that I was free, the whole picture of my past appeared in front of me, the Auschwitz ovens and every horror there. It took me many long years to comprehend somewhat the realities of the concentration camps, yet I still cannot put together all the inhuman events. Each person murdered during the Holocaust was a unique individual. When I see children playing on the playground, running and laughing, I stop and watch them. It always takes me back to Auschwitz-Birkenau and the children who were so brutally murdered in the gas chambers. They never had a chance to grow up, plan for a future, and fulfill their dreams. These memories will remain with me to my dying day. I will never forget. After we gained strength enough to be on our own, we began our journey home. We could go anywhere we wanted to go. We were free. We were still in our striped dresses. Clothing was hard to come by in Europe at this time. Many people wearing rags. All I know is we had a few bags of replicas, our only possession. We still lived in the past, afraid of not having enough to eat. At some point, someone gave me a regular dress. I took off the worn and stained striped dress and threw it away. I was glad to be rid of it. A constant reminder of Birkenau. I wondered, how do we begin new lives? What do we do with our freedom? Where do we go from here? My heart was full of pain, grieving the loss of my mother, my brother, and all of my aunts, uncles, cousins. Rosalie and her sisters eventually found their father, alive but very ill, in a Prague hospital. The family was reunited, but mourned the loss of their mother, brother, and so many others. It took time, but Rosalie, her sisters, and father did begin new lives. In September of 1949, Rosalie, Helen, Risey, and their father set sail on the RMS Aquitania to Nova Scotia. From there, they took a train to New York City. Charlotte married a survivor named Isaac in a displacement camp in Germany. They also immigrated to the United States and settled in Baltimore. Rosalie and her family then moved to Baltimore so they could all be together. Rosalie married Sidney, a Holocaust survivor from Belarus. They settled in New Jersey, along with her sister Charlotte. Lenka married before leaving Europe for Israel. Eventually, they moved to Montreal. In 1955, Helen visited her sister in Montreal and met Morris Herman. They married and stayed in Montreal. Charlotte and Isaac had 3 daughters who provided them with 6 grandchildren. Lenka had a son and a daughter, along with 5 grandchildren. Risey had 3 daughters and 2 grandchildren. Helen had 2 sons and 6 grandchildren. Rosalie had 3 children. Her daughter Ruthie has a son, and her son William has 3 children. Her oldest son, Mitchell, is the proud father of 3 sons and 7 grandsons. Even though the 5 sisters were in different states and countries, they always stayed close. Their memories of their experience of the Holocaust will haunt them for the rest of their lives, especially the destruction of their family, including many aunts, uncles, cousins, and their dear mother and brother. Rosalie survived because of her strong will and determination. The 5 sisters together served as a life force that they relied on to stay together and alive through the ghettos, Auschwitz, Birkenau, and other camps. They helped each other survive sickness, selections, beatings, and unbearable starvation. After the Holocaust, and in response to those voices who remained anti-Semitic and denied the atrocities of the Nazis, Rosalie made it her mission to raise awareness and to educate young people on what happened. She is the voice of her mother, brother, and the 6 million Jewish people murdered during the Holocaust. Given that anti-Semitism has not gone away and continues to remain visible and often turns violent, Rosalie Leibovich Simon's voice is more important than ever. As an actor who did not experience the Holocaust, it is my great honor and privilege to keep her voice alive so we can all hear her story.
I graduated